Hi, family. I'm an addict called Keith. In some ways, I feel like I should just sit down and shut up, because when your sponsee says that your sponsor says you're, the greatest man he ever knows, you can only disappoint. First, I want to thank the committee, not just for inviting me to come speak, but for all their hard work to put on a really great convention. I also want to thank the board of directors, who oftentimes don't get the thanks that they deserve for all the administrative and setup work that they have to do in order for this convention to now be in its 37th year. I remember my first convention. It was a FRCNA down in Palm Beach, where we were officially banned and never permitted to come back. So when the readings, when I talk about our behavior representing a much larger fellowship, understand that how important that is. But I remember being there and hearing the speakers and looking up and thinking, maybe someday in a dream, that maybe someday in a dream has come true for me over the past year, and it really is amazing. It's just another example of the gifts that this fellowship provides, and they are gifts. When I think about my story, when I think about where I am today, it really all starts from my earliest memories, and my earliest memories are really all about feeling different. It doesn't matter at what age it was, whether it was 2, 4, 6. I always felt different. I grew up. My dad was in school. My mom worked to pay the bills. We didn't have much money. My mom used to make my clothes because that's all we could afford. After my brother was born, we wore matching outfits because you got a better deal if you bought the same pattern and more of the material. And so I always had that feeling of being different, whether it was the way I looked, whether it was where I came from. I had terrible vision. I had big, thick Coke bottle glasses. When my teeth grew in, they grew in really badly crooked, and until I could get braces. It was always different. It was always different, and it was both an exterior, but even more importantly, an interior feeling of being different. And that's my childhood. That sums up my childhood up until, and I'll never forget when this happened. I was at a party with a lot of we were I think 12 years old, and a guy I knew was looking for somebody to get high with. And everybody was too intimidated. Nobody would do it. And he came up to me and I said, yeah, let's go do it. So we went outside, and I had no clue what I was doing. And I messed the whole thing up, and luckily, when we came back in, he didn't make fun of me for doing that. But from the moment I walked back in, everything was different. Because all of a sudden, people looked at me with awe, like, "Wow, you got high." All of a sudden, people wanted to talk to me. Instead of being excluded, I was included. All of a sudden, I was part of like this cool club. I was part of this group that I never was accepted by. And literally in 20 minutes, all that changed. And I wanted more of that. I wanted more of that. And so from that point forward, getting high in one way or another became a big part of what I did. I found, when you're an addict, you're able to find whatever you need to find. And so, at 12 years old in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, I was able to find the bars that I could get into. And, my friend and I would walk in. We were 12 years old. The working women in the bar would always take care of us, make sure none of the guys would harass us. We would sit and drink and do whatever. And it was no big deal. And I remember a friend of ours, older brother, wanted to get something, and he was a few years older. And I said, "Oh, well, I'll get it for you." And he, "Yeah, right, sure, you will." "No, take me." So he took me. I went in, and I was in there for probably like 20 minutes because I had to say hi to all my friends. And when I came out, he was panicked. He was like, "I didn't know. Should I call the cops?" but I don't want to get you in trouble. I don't want to get in trouble. And it was, no, I'm just hanging out with my friends. That was my crew. And all through high school, it really was about whatever group I needed to be a part of, I could. Because I used the way I did, I was part of the group that used. Because I did well in school, I was part of that group. Because I played sports, I was part of that group. I was a chameleon. I was able to fit in anywhere I needed to. Nobody knew who I really was, made me really happy. And that's really what I did. Years later, my mom asked me to share. After I'd been clean for a couple of years, she asked me to share some of what I'd been doing, and I started telling her because I thought, part of amends, I just need to be honest. I started telling her, and the sheer look of terror on her face, I stopped and I said, "You don't really want to hear this, do you?" And she said, "No, don't ever tell me anything ever again." And I never have. I went off to college, and I was, for me, that was addict heaven, because I no longer had anybody giving me any assignments. I had my own opportunity to do whatever I want. So I used to, when I first got clean, I realized, the reason that I was never anybody who used in the morning was because I didn't get up till noon. It was the first thing I did when I woke up, but it was the afternoon already, so I had the excuse I didn't use in the morning. And for about 2 years, that's what I did. I just used, and I found the right people to get me the right IDs. One day I was out with a bunch of people and doing the stuff that we do, and the next morning I heard from some friends that the police were looking for me. And, I started panicking. Later that night, the police officer had finally tracked down a phone number for me and called me. And for me, this is one of the first moments of my higher power showing up in, I wasn't clean, but sort of in a recovery process, because a police officer said, "We'd like you to come in for questioning." And I said, "It's not really a good time. Can I come in tomorrow?" And he said, "Sure. Sure, you can come in tomorrow." And so, like a good addict, I picked up the phone and called mommy and daddy and said, "Help." And they did. And as part of getting me out of trouble and just having to pay some money and be embarrassed, I agreed that I would go to a meeting when I got home. I had no intention of going to a meeting when I went home. My plan was to let them forget. It was going to be a week or two down the road. They would forget. Everything would be fine. I could go back to the life the way it was. I got home. A couple days later, nobody said anything about going to a meeting. I was thrilled. Everything, it's just another instance of getting away with stuff. And then my mom said, "So you ready to go to a meeting tonight?" And I was like, shit. So I said yes, and she took me to a meeting and dropped me off. It was a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I say the name Alcoholics Anonymous. It says in our basic text, "We are grateful to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous." It's a big part of my story and how I got here, so I don't disrespect them by not using their name. So I went. It was a meeting above a bar. And it was back when we smoked all the time. The cigarette machine was in the bar. So everybody would leave the meeting and go down to the bar to get cigarettes. And I was trying to figure out I wasn't 21 yet, and I lost my ID when I'd gotten busted. So I was trying to figure out, which one of them were going down to buy cigarettes and get a drink before they came back up. But I remember sitting in that first meeting, and I remember they had the steps up on the wall. And I looked at it, and I saw 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I agree with that. All right, so 4, I got to make this list. I can probably do that tomorrow. So I can get these 12 steps done in like a week. That's cool. And then I can go back to school and start using again. I remember when at the end they asked about anniversaries, and I thought, this is really cool. They celebrate wedding anniversaries. I had no clue, but there was some sort of connection there. So the next day when my mom said, "You're going to go to a meeting again today," I said, "Sure," and went back to the same meeting over the bar. And for the couple weeks that I was home, that's what I did. and I met some people there, and one of them, I'll never forget, this guy had said to me, when you go back, there are going to be a lot of temptation. So after you get back, will you just call me the next morning to tell me you didn't drink? So I said, sure. So I went back to school, didn't drink, just got high constantly, and called him very proud, saying, I didn't drink. He never asked about anything else, and I didn't tell him about anything else. And so that's what I did for a few months. I went to AA meetings during the day, and I got high every time I wasn't in a meeting. And it worked great. That was great. And one day I was sitting in a meeting, and I'd run into this guy who we had some things in common. And after the meeting, we were hanging out in the corner just talking. And I don't know why he said this to me, but he said, so do you still get high? And I don't know why I decided to be honest, and I said, yeah. And he said, well, when was the last time you got high? And I said, yesterday about 10 o'clock at night. And he said, well, when was the time before that? I said, yesterday about 7 o'clock at night. He said, well, when was the time before that? I said, yesterday at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He said, what was the day before that? I said, that would be Saturday. What was the day before that? Friday. And what was the day before that? Thursday. And he said, well, there's this thing called Narcotics Anonymous. And there's a meeting, this was on a Monday, there's a new meeting that's starting on Thursday. Do you think you could not use between now and Thursday and go to this meeting with me? And again, I have no idea why, I have no idea how. It's another example of a higher power, but I said, yeah, I think I can. That day was November 15th, 1987, and I haven't found it necessary to use ever since then. I was 19 years old, so for anybody who's young here in recovery, you can be young and you can get clean and you can stay clean. You can have an entire life. You don't ever have to use against your will ever, ever again. Ever. So I walked into that meeting Thursday night, and something just felt differently. I don't know what it was. I can't explain. It felt different. I felt home. There was a connection that I'd been missing. And I began to slowly hear some of the suggestions. People had talked about changing people, places, and things. I wasn't going to do that. I still lived with all the people that I used with. But I was willing to not use. I was willing to get a sponsor, and I was willing to work steps. And so they told me to find a sponsor who had everything that you wanted. So I looked around, and I found the guy. Lou had 2 years clean, which was incomprehensible at that time. He had a good job. He had a hot girlfriend. He had a nice car. He had a house. He had everything that I wanted. And so I asked him to be my sponsor. And he said yes. And he said, I'm going to make you the most important person here. And I thought, great, I'm going to be king. I'm going to be president. He said, you're going to be coffee maker. And I looked at him funny, and he said, be late with that coffee once, and everyone's going to know your name. And about 2 weeks later, I was late with the coffee. And everybody knew who that mother you-know-what was that was late with the coffee. It meant that I had to meet people. It meant that I had to have a little bit of responsibility in the beginning. My first service commitment was washing ashtrays, because almost every meeting was a smoking meeting at that time. Then I moved up to coffee maker. I learned about how important it was to be somewhere on time, to have responsibility, to have other people counting on you, even though it was only to make coffee. When that coffee was late, I learned how important it was. I began to get involved with service. I began to go to area service, and our area service was an hour away. We were a very, very small place. Like I said, when I got clean, it was the first time that there was a second meeting in a week. Before that, it was only a Saturday meeting. Then there was a Saturday and a Thursday meeting. And so we had to drive an hour to get to area service. And so I began to learn a little bit about service. And then I remember in November of 1988, I realized that I did have to start following some of these suggestions. And that I needed to stop living with all the people that I'd used with. And I came into a meeting and I shared and I said, I realized that it's time for me to move. And everybody started clapping and saying, "Thank fucking God." They were so tired of hearing about the insanity because I was not willing to listen to those suggestions. I will tell you, in all honesty, in early recovery, the only suggestion that I followed perfectly was not to use. I got a sponsor. I began working steps. I didn't listen to anything else, and I got to suffer the pain for it. As I sponsor men today, I tell them when they ask me to sponsor them, you're entitled to your pain. I'm not going to rob you of it. I'm not going to steal it from you. I will share my experience, strength, and hope. I will, tell you what I think, and you're going to do what you want to do. If it works out great, that's wonderful. I'm happy. I'm thrilled for you. If it doesn't, I'll be here. I'm never going to tell you I told you so. But you're entitled to your pain, and I'm not going to rescue you from it. I'm not going to save you from it. Just don't use no matter what. So I was going to meetings and beginning to work the steps, and that fourth step's always a brutal one. And there was a guy, he was a couple years younger than me at the time, and he used to walk up to me at every meeting. Did you do your fourth step yet? Did you do your fourth step? Dude, did you do your fourth step? Did you do your fourth step yet? Did you do it? Did you do your fourth step? Did you do your fourth step? Every meeting, he would hammer me with this. So I finally said to my sponsor, can we just do fourth and fifth step? I'm tired of this. So we did, and I did my fourth step. And the truth is I did my fourth step entirely so that my first fourth step entirely so that the next time he came up to me and said, did you do your fourth step? Did you do your fourth step? I could say, I didn't. Now leave me the fuck alone. The important thing is that I did it. It worked. It got me to do something that otherwise I may not have. And Rich is still clean today. There are three of us that all got clean together. He's the youngest of the three of us, and he also has the most clean time of the three of us. So I went to my sponsor's house. His beautiful girlfriend, served us a little snack and something to some lemonade or something to drink. And we sat down to do my fifth step. And he said, "Did you do the first two parts?" And I looked at him completely blank-faced and said, "What are the first two parts?" And he said, "Admitted to God and yourself." So that comes first before you can admit it to another human being. And I said, "No." And he said, "Go upstairs." He said, "You've got to do that before we can even start." So I went upstairs and spent some time praying and meditating and taking a look at what I'd written. Now, I did follow the suggestion in the fourth step of writing it as if there was no fifth step. So I put stuff on that fourth step that I was never going to share with anybody. No one was ever going to hear this, but I was doing what I was told. I was writing it down. Then we were going to burn it. No one would ever see it. And so when I started sharing my fifth step with them, I would share, the safe stuff, and Lou would look at me and say, "Yeah, I did that too. Yeah, I did that too." So I started getting pissed because, I'm unique. I'm different. And so I started taking little bits of the stuff that I wasn't sure I wanted to share, but maybe would, and throwing that at him. And then I was still getting, "Yeah, I did that too. I did that too." So I started taking the heavier stuff and sharing that because I was sure that I was going to freak him out. And I got, "Yeah, I did that too. I did that too." And once I got over being pissed off because I wasn't unique, I realized that I wasn't unique. I realized that I wasn't this evil person, that there were things I had done that weren't wonderful. There were things that I'd done that I wasn't going to be proud of, but it didn't mean that I was a bad person. It means that I had done some bad things. And it gave me an opportunity to get beyond being stuck into the things that I had done compared to the person that I was and that I would be. Lou asked me to put down at that time, make a list of everything that I hoped to have at a year clean and seal it in an envelope, and we'd open it when I had a year clean. And I said, "Are you sure you want everything that I would dream and I would wish? Because I can dream and wish pretty big." He said, "Put it all down." So I did. And a year later, we opened it together, and I realized just how much I would have shortchanged myself if that's all I would have gotten. The truth is recovery provides you a life. It's provided me a life beyond my wildest dreams. Honestly, beyond my wildest dreams. I could never, as this 19-year-old, spoiled, rotten kid, could never imagine to have the life that I do today. I finished college, I went and got a job, was still going to meetings, still getting clean, ended up going back to get a master's degree, still going to meetings, still involved with service, doing all the things that we're told, and my life began to get better. And I finished my master's degree and decided I was going to move to Florida. My goal was to be on one of the beaches as soon as possible. So I had an opportunity to do an internship to finish my degree in Gainesville, which is not close to the beaches. But I took it because I figured I'd be there for 3 months, and then boom, I was heading to the beach. 21 years later, I left Gainesville. Our best plans. But when I moved to Gainesville, I knew nobody. I moved there knowing the only people I knew were friends of my parents who I did not want to really even say hi to. And so I did, again, what we were told. I started going to meetings and meeting people and putting myself right in the middle, getting introduced to people, getting involved with service. I began looking for a new sponsor because my sponsor was still in Pennsylvania, and I knew I needed to get somebody local, and I couldn't find anybody. And as George says, when we allow ourselves to be open, it's amazing the things that God does for us. And so I'd been there a month and was beginning and trying to find a new sponsor and struggling, and boom, this guy moves into town, and we have enough things in common. And so I asked him to be my sponsor, and it was one of those transformative moments in my recovery, because instead of just being involved in the area where I was, he began encouraging me to go to regional service, and I started meeting a whole lot of other people, and I ended up deciding I wanted to get involved with regional service. So I decided, I'd been to 2 FRCNAs by then, I had a great time, I decided that's where I wanted to get involved. And the FRC board at that time had 2 openings. So I decided to run for it. And it was me and this one other woman who were running for 2 openings. So 2 of us running for 2 openings. So she spoke and gave her qualifications, I spoke and gave my qualifications, 2 of us running for 2 openings. They took the vote. She won. I lost. I lost to nobody. They decided that it was better to have nobody than to have me. I sat there stunned. And then this man stood up and said, "Guys, do you realize we had 2 openings and 2 people running and you only elected 1? And everybody looked and said, "No." I said, "Do you guys want to revote?" "Yes." So I finally beat nobody. I spent 7 years serving on the board of directors of FRCNA, finishing up as board president, and it was an amazing time. It put me in a different environment with people who, it wasn't that they had more clean time than I did, but they had more life experience than I did. And I remember, they were all at least 10 years older than me, and sitting there talking, with these men and women, and they would talk about essentially me without saying it was me. But they would say, there's all these people who have been clean X amount of years, but haven't had these life experiences yet. And there's a difference between us and them because of the life experiences that we had. They'd all had houses, and I never bought a house. I was 24, 26 years old. They, had careers. I was just getting started with jobs. Everything in life, they had different life experiences that I simply hadn't had yet. And so there were things I could learn from them because of that. And I really surrounded myself with them. And even to this day, many of them are some of my closest friends. One of them has now been my sponsor for about 20 years. We met through regional service. We were friends for a couple years. My sponsor had died of cancer, and I was looking and asked him. And I'll tell you, one of the beautiful things about sponsorship for me, especially, I'll say this: if you don't have the best sponsor in Narcotics Anonymous, then you either need to work on that relationship or you need to get a new one who will be the best sponsor in Narcotics Anonymous. My relationship with my sponsor is one of the most intimate, closest relationships that I have in my life, if not the most intimate, closest relationship that I have in my life. This man knows everything about me. There are no secrets. And when I say there are no secrets, I mean there are no secrets. There's nothing about me, about who I am, about what I've done, about what I think, about my defects of character, about attitudes, about frustrations, about my marriage, about my children, about anything that he doesn't know. When I pick up the phone and call him, he knows within 30 seconds if it's just a check-in call or if there's something going on. We don't have to deal with all the back and forth and the play and the volleyball and then this and that. That's because we've developed this relationship over 20 years. I didn't have this relationship with him in the beginning, but that has been one of the best investments of my life. As I was involved with regional service, through work I had met this girl that was cute, that I liked. I thought she was interesting. I asked her out. She told me she had other plans, which wasn't a big deal for me because my attitude at that time was there's tons of fish in the sea. If you say no, I'm moving on to the next one. And that's what I did. And about 6 months later, she started coming to meetings. And so I remember calling my sponsor at that time, and this was my sponsor who passed away from cancer. And Jack was a no-nonsense kind of guy. And I said, Jack, I met this girl. She's really cute, and I asked her out, and she said no. And then about 6 months later now, she started coming to meetings. Does she still count as a newcomer? He said, what do you think? I said, I know what I think. That's why I'm asking you. Again, I chose not to follow the suggestions. I thought that it would be different if her sponsor said it was okay, if I had told my sponsor if we were going to meetings together, that it would be different. And for a little while it was. We fell in love, we got married, we started having kids, and then she chose to use. It was one of the hardest things that in recovery that I've ever had to deal with was her relapse. First, understanding that it had nothing to do with me. It sounds kind of ridiculous, but at the time I thought that it said something about me. And her struggle to get clean again and to know whether our relationship would survive or not, was very, very difficult. I spent a lot of time going to a lot of meetings. I spent a lot of time talking to my sponsor. I was at FRCNA while she was in treatment one year, walking down International Drive in Orlando, crying, collapsing into my sponsor's arms as I struggled with it. I made the decision to stay. That was my choice. It's my decision. And it's one of those things that throughout the process, I made that decision. So I own it. I don't put anything on anybody else. And eventually I came to understand that her recovery is her business. It's not mine. So for a long time, I didn't even know what her clean date was because it had changed so frequently that I didn't want to know. And it wasn't until she had a few years clean that I even knew when it was, because I had to step away. It's not about me. I had to work on me and let her work on her. And this year she celebrated 12 years, I think. When I say I don't know, I really, it's not my business. So I do my best to not to be in that. But as life continued to move on, my career began to really grow, and I'd been at the same job 15 years. I had it was a great opportunity. It was a great job, and I'd been approached for a variety of different opportunities to leave, and had always said no. But in early 2013, I was approached with this really big opportunity to leave Gainesville and move out to Seattle. It was a huge promotion. It was a huge step up in prestige. It was a huge boost to my ego. It was a lot more money. And I'd made a deal with my wife that if I was interested in a job, I would tell her where it was, and she would say, yes, I'd consider living there, or no, I wouldn't. If she said no, then that was the end of it. If she said she'd consider it, then I would look at it. I almost didn't even tell her about this job, because I thought there's no way she's moving from Gainesville, Florida to Seattle, Washington. But for some reason I did, and she said, I'd consider living there, which, blew my mind. So I ended up going through the process and ended up deciding to take the job, leave, a place that had been home for me for 21 years, leave a support group that I'd had for 21 years to move cross country. And so we packed everything up and got ready to move. And I was getting ready to go to the airport to get on my flight when my phone rang. It was the moving company, and they called to tell me that our moving truck had caught on fire and burned and we lost everything. So first I thought it was a prank, because my friends would do that. And then I realized that it wasn't, that our moving truck had burned, and they called it a total loss. So we drove to Jacksonville. It hadn't left the lot yet. And saw, very depressing. It was very, very depressing. And we started going through things. This was a moment that when I talk to people, is my proof that there is a God. So we're going through things, and they're all packed next to each other. And what we found is essentially everything that could be replaced with money, was ruined. And just about everything that could never be replaced with any amount of money was fine. It was not because of where it was packed on the truck, because they were right next to each other, what was ruined and what wasn't. And so we went there feeling really sad and depressed and not sure what we were going to do, and left there smiling and laughing, because the things that really mattered were fine and everything else could just be replaced with money. I called the woman who had hired me for this job and said, I've got good news and bad news. So she said, what's the bad news? I said, our moving truck burned and we lost everything. She said, oh my God, what's the good news? I said, I don't have to unpack. My higher power doesn't put me in positions or doesn't put things in my life that aren't going to end up helping me get to a better place. I may not like it in that moment. I may not want it in that moment. But when I get to the other side, it's always better. It's always what I needed. I'm always grateful for it after. And this was one of those instances that really taught me what was important in life and what wasn't. We lost material things. Nobody got hurt. We still had a roof over our head. We had insurance that, covered most of the losses that we had. It was not people would call it a tragedy. It was not a tragedy. It was a pain in the ass. It was inconvenient. It was disappointing. It was not a tragedy. We got out to Seattle. I had a few things in my car that I had shipped, so I unpacked that and took pictures of my house completely unpacked in like 20 minutes. Everybody laughed. So I spent 3 years out there doing this really high-profile, ego-boosting kind of job. And I came to, I was going to meetings and trying to find a place to connect, but really struggling to find the right place, to find the meetings that I could make, understanding the traffic patterns out there, and what time I would have to leave to actually get somewhere, and could I actually get there, and I was talking to a friend of mine who was in recovery, and he said, yeah, I'm going to chair this meeting. I'm like, oh, where is it? Because I always wanted to know, because I was trying to find where the best places were. And when he told me, I looked, and it was right around the corner from my office. And it was a 6 o'clock meeting, which meant I could actually leave at like 5:30 and get there and avoid the terrible traffic until the meeting was over. And so I said, yeah, I'll come meet you. So I went and I walked into this meeting and instantly felt the atmosphere that I'd been looking for. And I began to meet the type of people that I was able to connect with. And so I made that my home group. One of the things that was fantastic for me is, for anybody here who's got some time, you know that sometimes when people find out how long you've been clean, there's a lot of heavy expectations that get put on you. And so sometimes it's hard to be able to just share about the daily struggles that you have, because if you have 25 or 27 or 28 or 15 or however long you've been clean, people have these expectations of you that sometimes it's easy to struggle to live up to. I walked in there and nobody knew who I was. Nobody knew how long I'd been clean. I just got to be this dude sitting in the meeting. And then they learned my name, and I'll never forget at the first group conscience, one of the members of the home group said, "Does anybody need a service commitment?" and stared right at me. So I said, "Sure." So I became, at this church there's a doorbell that you had to ring to be let in. So my service commitment was, I was one of two doorbell responding people. So when the doorbell rang, I jumped up and opened the door and gave a hug and came back to the meeting. And the next time it rang, the next person would jump up and get the door. And then the time after that, it was my turn. And it was great. I loved it. It reminded me of my ashtray washing days. I just got to be of service. I just got to be a guy in recovery. And then I met George, and George asked me to sponsor him, and that sort of broke my anonymity, because we'd be hanging out and someone would talk to him, and George would say, "Yeah, this is Keith, my sponsor." And they'd say, "Oh, Keith, it's so great that you asked George to sponsor you." And George would say, "No, he's my sponsor." And the look on their face was priceless, because their face would freeze, because they couldn't comprehend any of it. Like, you mean this guy that we don't really know and thought might be a newcomer? And so I got really connected. So in this time period, one of the things that we've come to realize is that we really weren't Pacific Northwest people. We really loved living in Florida. We loved the Southeast. We loved the people, the way of life. And so I was involved in contract negotiations, and while they wanted me to sign a new contract, it wasn't something that I felt comfortable with. And so I begun looking for a new job, and it came down to two different opportunities. One was coming back to Florida with a great job, but it was going to be a lateral type move and was going to be a significant decrease in pay, ego, status, but we'd be back in Florida. The other was going to Denver, where it would have been a lot more money, a lot more ego, a lot more status. One would be, a career kind of sidestep. The other would be a huge career jump. And I spent a lot of time talking with my sponsor about it. And Ron, my sponsor, is very well known for his pro and con list. And so, we did I did my pro and con list, and talked through everything with him. And made the decision. I'd grown up. My parents had always lived in the mindset that you always want to take the next step up. That bigger is better. That more money is better. That more power, more ego, more status is better. That's how I was raised. So as I went through building my career, that's sort of what I had lived on, and that was why I made part of why I made the decision to go to Seattle. When I made this decision, I understood that for me, more money and more status and more ego was not most important. My parents, thank God, are still alive, and I have a wonderful relationship with them. My mom had been in a really bad car accident, and when I lived in Gainesville, I was always the first one to be there. I could always do things. I was in Seattle. I couldn't get there for a week. I wasn't the first one. I felt that. I noticed that. My dad had recently retired because he'd been in the hospital for exhaustion, because he'd pushed himself too much on that more money, more power, more prestige, more ego kind of stuff. My in-laws were getting older. We were missing things in the family because we were so far away. And so I made the decision that family and happiness were far more important than money, far more important than ego, far more important than status. And so I turned down the opportunity, for a lot more money and a lot more ego and a lot more status, and haven't regretted it since. I have two children, and two boys, 18 and 15. One's a senior in high school. One is a freshman in high school. And sometimes I wonder, how are they my children? My son finally tried to do something that I would have done yesterday. So he's 18 years old, and it's the first time I can see part of me in him with that, manipulation. And he's home alone this weekend, and he called me. I'm picking up some friends. They want to talk to you to make sure that you're going to be home when I get home. I said, but I'm not. I know, but they need to talk to you to make sure you're going to be there. Didn't you say you'd be home at 4:30? I said, yeah, tomorrow, not today. And that's like the most manipulation he can do. I tell him constantly, you're just not good enough. When we were in Seattle, the Seahawks won the Super Bowl, and so you were allowed to miss school to go to the parade. And he decided, no, I can't miss school. I need to go today. I thought, part of me was like, I'm so proud that he wants to be this good student, and part of me was devastated. Like, I never missed a chance to skip school, and now they're saying you can and you won't. I'm very, very blessed with my children, with the people that they are. They never knew me using, and they don't remember my wife's relapse at all. We've had the conversation about addiction, about drugs, honest conversation. I remember when we sat down with our oldest and started talking to him about it. I think he was about 11 or 12 years old. We asked, do you have any more questions? No. And the next day he came back, I do have one more question. Sure, what is it? What drugs did you use? Not a comfortable conversation with an 11-year-old. But we build an honest relationship where we talk about all of this sort of stuff, where we're a part of their lives and they're a part of our lives, and we don't keep secrets from them, and for the most part, I don't think that they keep secrets from us. They try sometimes, but like I said, they're just not good enough. My oldest is an athlete. He's a football player. And so I spent the last year traveling the country with him, going to different colleges and meeting with different coaches. And it's been an incredible lesson for me in humility. Understanding that what he wants is not what I want, and what I want is not what he wants. And what matters is what he wants, not what I want. Through the process, there have been lots of times that have been very painful for me, based on my own expectations of what it means to be a dad. He had an incredible opportunity to go play football at an incredible school, but for the first year at least, I was going to have to pay the full expense of it. The full expense was $70,000 for a year. I can't afford that. And I had the conversation with him, like I'd love to, and I want you to, but I can't afford that. And it was very humbling, and it was embarrassing. Not embarrassing that I couldn't pay $70,000 a year, because that's a crazy amount of money, but because for me, it made me feel like I wasn't being the type of father that I wanted to be. It made me feel like I had done something wrong, that I had failed, that I hadn't accomplished what I could have, should have for my children. And I got to understand that, 99.9% of this country can't afford to pay $70,000 a year, and that's okay. And I don't have to have unrealistic expectations of myself. It's really easy for me to put unrealistic expectations on myself. It's really easy for me to think that I have to do everything better than perfect. So the last few months have been a whirlwind of craziness where we've gotten to see, in many ways, college football recruiting is like addiction. Everybody lies to you. They lie, they cheat, they steal, they do all sorts of stuff. And it's been, the hardest part for me has been watching, the ups and downs for him, and watching, his emotions, the way they swing. You can do anything you want to me, and that's one thing, but when you do it to my kids, it's something different. And so it's been really difficult, and exhilarating at times as well. And so we're getting close to the end, and there's a part of me that's really grateful that we're coming to the end, and there's a part of me that's really sad that we're coming to the end, because we've been on this year-long journey together of having these incredible experiences, and doing all sorts of really neat things, and once it's done, it's done. It'll be on to something new. But when I talk about where I am today, there's this has been a pretty incredible year for me. We talk about the different milestones that we have in our life. So this year, in November, I had 30 years clean. In December, I turned 50 years old. In May, my son will graduate high school, and my wife and I will have been married 20 years. Lot of major milestones. And if you're anything like me, I have just as much problem with the good milestones as I do with the crap that happens in my life. And so to have this many in a row, is kind of a little overwhelming. And so we're getting closer and closer to him leaving the house, and we're getting closer and closer to being empty nesters, because my younger one only has 3 more years, and that's going to go in an instant. And it's been a lot emotionally to deal with it, and I find myself continuing to do step work. The speakers yesterday talked about continuing to do step work. I continue to do step work with my sponsor and with the guys that I sponsor. I continue to get involved and to be involved, and to put myself in the center. About 6 years ago, 6 months ago, 6 weeks ago, gosh, I'm really off. About 6 weeks ago, one of those guys that I met through regional service and had been friends with for about 25 years and sponsored for the last 10, went into his doctor for a little outpatient procedure on his neck. And I got a call a few hours later that he had collapsed and was in a coma, and it didn't look good. And I got a call the next day that the doctors were saying that he was brain dead, and went down to see him the day after. And again, the test came back that he was gone. As I have these life moments that have been going on this year, and then I deal with Bill dying. Not much older than I am, and having sponsored him for the last 10 years, we'd grown very, very close. Not too long ago, we had done a 6-step together, and really gotten deep and intimate about our defects of character, and understanding who we are. It's been hard. He lived down in the West Palm area, and so I think for 3 or 4 out of 5 weeks, I had driven down there on Sunday to see him, and then for the family, and then for the family memorial, and then for the NA memorial, and it's hard realizing how quick it can all go. That he was fine Friday morning, and just a few hours later, that was it. I spent a lot of time talking with my sponsor about it. Like I said, that relationship with my sponsor is one of the greatest gifts that I have. He couldn't be here today because about 4.5 years ago, his wife was diagnosed with a terminal brain cancer, and they gave her 6 months to live at that time. I was there in the room as the doctor. I was living in Seattle, but happened to be in Tampa that day at the hospital at that moment when the doctor came in to give the diagnosis. And no accidents. There are plenty of proof of a higher power in my life. It's 4.5 years later, and she's still alive. It's another miracle. But she's going through another round of chemo, and so he couldn't be here. And part of me understands that, and part of me, is a little sad about it because of the relationship that we have. In many ways, he's the big brother that I never had. He's gotten to watch me grow up in recovery. He's gotten to watch my kids grow up. He loves to tell the story of watching me chairing the Florida region as I was changing my oldest diaper at the same time. And just as an example that we can do anything that we want in Narcotics Anonymous. We can be a parent while we're being of service, while we have a career, while we have a relationship. The only limitations that exist are the ones that we put on ourselves. My life is truly beyond my wildest dreams. When I talked about taking this job for all the right reasons for me, even though it meant that there were, from a status and an ego and a financial point of view, it was a step down. A year and a half into the job, all of a sudden things are changing, and it looks like in the next 6 months or so, it'll end up being an increase in salary, and an increase in status, and an increase in ego, and I didn't take the job because I thought that's what was going to happen. It's just what I've learned is that when I get out of the way and I let my God be in charge of whatever's going to happen, good shit happens. I've never, like I said, my God has never disappointed me, ever. I may not have gotten what I wanted in the moment, but getting what I wanted in the moment would have been the wrong thing in retrospect. And so when I trust in my higher power and truly work that third step, that I truly turn it over and understand that I'm not in charge. I've got my responsibilities. I've got to do my footwork. I can't just sit back and say, you do it all. I do my part and leave the results. Amazing stuff happens. I've been clean 30 years now, and I can't wait to see what the next 30 have. I look around and when I first got clean, there was, people talked about there not being clean time in NA, and that's not the truth. All you got to do is look around. There are plenty of people with 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, 30, 40. You stay clean in Narcotics Anonymous. You build a life in Narcotics Anonymous. You get these incredible gifts. You get these incredible, just these unbelievable life comes to us. Somebody spoke earlier this weekend about how everything that they've gotten good in their life comes from Narcotics Anonymous. That's my experience. Everything that I have good in my life has come from Narcotics Anonymous. Everything that I have that matters in any way, shape, or form has come from Narcotics Anonymous. And I know, moving into the future, that everything I'm going to get that's going to be positive in my life is going to come from Narcotics Anonymous. So I'm really grateful. Thank you all. And I guess that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you very much for coming and sharing your experience, strength, and hope. We're going to circle up and close this meeting.